Recording in progress.
And there's a microphone now in the right place.
It is in the right place.
So, wonderful. Before we start on the medieval art, which is largely what this talk is about, I'd like to introduce to you Carol. No, you need to go there so the people on Zoom can see you too. Do you mind just standing up while I talk? Because after this talk, those of us who are there in person are going to go over to Julian Church and talk about the costumes and the trials and tribulations of scribes and illuminators in Julian's time, which of course is very relevant because Julian would have faced all this herself. How are they actually able to see Carol?
No. I have to ask them that. I was in the process of transferring over to
Okay.
to the PowerPoint, but I'll come.
Okay, while Howard's fiddling with the technology, I'll just also give you a couple of updates on the exhibition itself. One is I've had a query from an artist about the proposals. This is the proposal stage. It's proposals only, we need only but in by the 31st of May. It's not the finished work. We don't need photographs, good photographs of the work for the catalogue until the beginning of September. So you've got time to get on with this. But some artists apparently thought that I was asking for the whole thing by the 31st of May, which would be a big ask.
Thank you. May I ask the participants on Zoom, please, to chat to me and tell me whether you're seeing the PowerPoint screen or whether you're seeing the room?
Yes, no?
I'm not getting any chats back at the moment.
Oh, no, the hotspots failing.
I think I'm going to have to ask people on Zoom, forgive me, people on Zoom, if one of you could unmute yourself and speak to us to tell us what you can see, we'd be very grateful because we're with suboptimal technology at the moment.
We can see both.
You can see both what?
I can see both.
Both the PowerPoint and the room.
Yes, and I can see both the PowerPoint and the room as well.
That's
That's
fantastic.
the PowerPoint. PowerPoint and room.
Good.
In that case, I shall introduce Carol, who was a friend of mine who we both reenacted for the Paston Society when we were working with them on the Paston letters, which of course come just after Julian's time. But this one is in fact 14th century dress. And you'll see, of course, it's linen, not cotton, which is a far more difficult process to weave, I believe. And we have the woolen headdress. Underneath, you've got the cap. Everybody wore caps. Everybody wore headdresses. If they were adults, that is. This is partly for warmth and partly for hygiene because hair washing wasn't a great feature. And well, you can just imagine there's a fair amount of wildlife around the person. Now, Carol herself will tell you that this is extremely heavy. It is, isn't it? And when you've got the cloak on top of that, the cloak is double lined and outward. Inside linen, outside wool again, because you know a day like this it's pouring in Norwich, and if you were rich you were dressed like this. If you were poor, you simply put a bit of sacking over your head when it poured with rain and hope for the best. And here we have what everybody carried around with them. Would you like to draw it? The eating knife, which served also as a dagger. I don't think they saw this side. everybody had one, men and women, probably not children. Yeah, it was for eating, but it was also for protection, particularly for women. Always a leather belt, always a purse, usually leather, in which you carried around your possessions because they hadn't invented pockets. And everything would have been handmade, and that's what I meant when I was speaking last time about how clothes were so important. And Julian talks a lot about clothes. Clothes were left as welcome bequests in wills. Clothes ruled your life, particularly if you were poor. And if somebody gave you something, it was a very welcome gift.
And Julian writes about him being clothed in God.
Yes, yes. And of course, this was summer and winter. You didn't sort of suddenly throw everything off because it was a bit hot. And what we see as Julian being dressed as a nun is perhaps just 14th century woman's wear, because that is what nuns' costumes were based on, same as with the priests. You'll get a chance to sort of explore this more over in the church afterwards, but now we'll move on to the medieval art. I'm saying this partly because Julian probably had a drop spindle in her cell, because most women did this, you know, almost as a reflective action. The drop spindle would give you the thread with which you could then weave the wool. And although I'm not talking about clothes all the time, it's worth remembering also that all the dyes were natural and were based on exactly the same pigments as the paints. And so I'll move on. Julian, as I said last time, in her cell, would not have been surrounded with white walls and quiet. She would have been surrounded by sprawled walls full of pictures and quite a lot of noise. Howard, can we go on with the PowerPoint, please? Now this is high-class painting in the 14th century. This was painted for Richard II in 1400, and he, of course, was the weak. He came to the throne very young, so he wasn't exactly a child king, more of a teenage king. And he's most of the cause of the Wars of the Roses because his great rival, Edward, was a noted leader in battle, whereas Richard was basically a bit of a wimp, let's say. So he wasn't very good at dealing with the peasants and whatnot, and he wasn't good in battle. And the rival family, the Yorks, were always after his blood and quite often succeeded. His mother, on the other hand, was fearsome, but we won't get on to that now. Now, I put this slide up first because obviously in a Norwich church, a humble Norwich church, you wouldn't see art of this quality. But I wanted to particularly mention the symbolism of colour. And it's based partly on cost. All that gold leaf you can see is very costly. Therefore, gold leaf often symbolises holiness and heaven. It's used for the halos, used for the backgrounds of the angels, as you can see on the other half of the diptych. And there we have Mary in blue, which is the next most expensive colour, because blue was from lapis lazuli, which had to be ground down and turned into pigment. So this idea we have with Mary always in blue, you won't see that much earlier in the previous period necessarily. She's dressed in other colours. It's because of the whole idea of richness in heaven going with holiness, if that makes sense. Oh, we're on to St. Julian. Was that intentional? Now we've got St. Julian. Now, in most churches, one of the things you have on the wall is the story of the life of the saint to whom the church was dedicated. But St Julian's is dedicated to St Julian the Hospitalier, who was a 4th century nobleman, shown here in his finery. It's a very curious story. I'll put up the whole story so you can read it. We might have to flip back. Is that going to be really difficult?
Not sure.
Okay, we won't get onto the story yet. I will tell you a bit of the story. The basics of the story is, and the reason he's known as the ferryman, is that before Julian was born, his parents went to a prophetess who told them that their son would be the death of them. Now, they were obviously upset about this, and they dealt with it by farming the young Julian out to another noble family far away from them, which, as you'll know, has got echoes of various classical stories. And of course, it all went horribly wrong because Julian grew up, got married, lovely young wife, and one day the wife had 2 visitors who were actually Julian's parents come to see if they could find him again. Now he was a grown-up, and she hospitably invited them in to stay with her because he was absent hunting or something, I think. So when Julian came home, he saw these 2 complete strangers in his own bed with his wife, and in great fury, he whipped out his sword and killed them. Now, obviously, the wife then, in great floods of tears, told him who they were, and there was great grief all round. And in repentance, he and his wife then vowed to follow God for the rest of their lives. And they ended up setting up a house on the banks of the river where they welcomed all, particularly lepers in some stories. And that's why he's got an oar, because he used to ferry people across the river. But of course, this has strong echoes of another story, the story of St Christopher. And in English churches, St Christopher is far more important. St Christopher is actually one of the most common wall paintings to be uncovered in English churches, even above Christ and the Virgin Mary, I regret to say, but not on the continents. So this is an Italian fresco painting of St Julian, but there never was one, as far as we know, in Julian's church. I'm correct in that, am I?
I don't know.
Impossible to tell now, I suppose, what was the wall and what not. So can we move on now? So this is the Golden Legend version of the story. Oh, in this one, St Julian meets a stag. Sometimes he's shown with a stag who says he's going to join his parents, but it depends. The legends go on and on. The main thing to remember is that if you see a guy with a sword and it's wrapped up, it's quite often St Julian. Which brings me to the other thing. All these saints, they have things they carry which tell you their story. And long ago, everybody knew the stories. Even the Victorians would have known the stories because the Golden Legend was very popular with them. But I can remember when I was studying for my art history degree, so many of my colleagues coming up to me and asking me what things meant. Even things like the staff with the cross and the serpent coiled around it, which of course is the serpent raised in the desert. Because background knowledge is just, it's just not the sort of thing that's taught nowadays. Unless you've got a particular interest, you're not going to come across all these saints. You can get books, you can look online. It's a lot easier than it used to be when I was a student. But yeah, it does put a bit of a barrier between us and the past. Carry on. Now this is, I chose this one, it's actually from Gloucestershire, not Norfolk, but this gives you an idea of how bright and vivid St Julian's would have been. The basic colour in every church were the earth colours, because they were the cheapest. They were dug up, ground down, and used as pigments by all the artists. And that's why you get this predominance of deep red, umber, sienna, and the ochres, because they were the most easily available. And not just in churches, all over the castles you get them. In people's houses, they would have been painted like this. And we can move on, I think. I think myself, that one's a bit too red. But, I hope we can move on. Right, among the stories told of the saints, we also get that I put St. Christopher at the top because oh, he's the one at the back you can barely see, but I hope we'll see another St. Christopher later. Here we've got the Seven Mercies up there, and that's at Edingthorpe Church on the North Norfolk coast. And that's actually very clear if you go up there. That's the tree of life in the middle. Medieval leaves are usually this shape, because it's also a sign of the Trinity. And you've got that lovely green, which would be terra verde, green earth. And then you can see the ochres there. Sorry, people online aren't going to be able to see me pointing. Shall I go around the other side?
If I do that, and
Yeah.
follow you around.
That figure underneath there, that's the one. You see a lot of that in Norfolk churches, because the jobbing artists that went round and took the job of decorating the local church, this is how they'd first of all draw in their figures, these quick sketches. And it's wrong to call them naive, because they are skilled and they are full of life. And in some ways I prefer them to the more mannered figures like the one below. In a Norfolk church like Edingthorpe, which had no great lord of the manor, it had a lord of the manor. It belonged to Bacton Priory, Bromholm then in those days. So it was rich enough to have artists coming round, but you're not going to see gold leaf and whatnot in Edingthorpe, or indeed this background wash, because of course the artist would have to do that, wax the areas they wanted to leave clear, and then come back. The basic is white lime wash as a basic. It's not like the churches in Italy where you've got these beautiful surfaces delicately prepared for egg tempera. It's a lot more rough and ready in Norfolk churches. And what happened was, and the reason the paintings are preserved for Norfolk, sorry, I'm probably too close to them right now, is the habit of lime wash carried on. So when the command came from on high that now all churches have to be plain white, the locals simply put another coat of lime wash on. And when then somebody came along and said, yes, but you can't put up text, put the text on the next coat, put another coat on when that was no longer the fashion. And Paston Church, which is the one I'm most familiar with, you can actually see in the church at the moment, because they are at the moment uncovering the wall paintings. You can see the layers. It's quite fascinating as they uncover them. But when I first knew Paston Church 30 years ago, all you could see was the St. Christopher, which was uncovered in the 1920s by accident. But now, yes, we've got more from Paston later. And Houghton on the Hill in Norfolk, which is famously the church that was completely ruined and then was discovered to have all these fascinating wall paintings. If you go in now, it's an absolute feast for the eye. Every surface is covered. And even Fritton, which has been inhabited the whole time, they've uncovered the wall paintings at Fritton on the way to Great Yarmouth. And it's absolutely beautiful. But you can see the different centuries. You know, I don't like this, so I'll paint another one on top. You know, easy. Can we carry on? Oh, I didn't explain the Seven Mercies. I'll just do it but don't go back, I'll just say it. You'll notice that 7 comes into it a lot because it's a holy number. There are 7 mercies, or you might call them the gifts of charity. So there's love and mercy and forgiveness. And I'm not good enough at this to recite all these 7 virtues. And then to balance them, you've got the 7 deadly sins, which we're all familiar with: sloth and anger, covetousness, lust, greed. And they were painted up in the churches more commonly in England, as far as we know from what's uncovered so far, than the saints or the life of Christ or the life of Mary. So obviously what the priests wanted was a good basis for their homilies. Do like this tree of good, don't do like this lot of sins. You don't get that much of the life of Christ. You get the nativities, you get the crucifixion, and you get the last judgment. And this is the last judgment at St Giles, Bradfield, which is another very small church. This is right over the arch, going up towards the altar steps. And you can see very clearly here the colours of the urn that we use. And you can see the stylisation of the painting.
Lucy, forgive me, I can't actually read that picture. Can you read it for us?
Oh, sorry.
What is the red?
You've got the feet at the bottom.
Right.
Can you see the toes?
Yeah.
Just by the arch, the other side.
2.
There's some
Right.
toes peeping out under the cloak. Then you've got the cloak in the red of blood. Then you've got the figure that is seated
I see.
on a sort of arch.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about the arch, actually. I have a feeling it's got symbolism, but I'm not sure which. And then you've got the upper figure, no head.
No head. Oh, that helps.
No
very much.
head, okay. And on one side, you've got the orb he's holding here, and here you can see the blood pouring from his hand. Can you see? There. And over him are palms of victory.
Right.
Can I
Yes.
interrupt and ask a question? I can't see the PowerPoint. I don't know if other people on Zoom can see it. It seems to have gone.
Howard, that's a question for you.
Right. Can I ask other people whether they can see it, please?
See what? What are we looking for?
Yes, I can see the PowerPoint.
An audience on Zoom
I
as
can
well.
see the PowerPoint.
I can see.
Right. So I'm very sorry, but because some people on Zoom are seeing the PowerPoint, I think it may be your machine rather than mine that's failing in this regard.
Okay, I might need to log out and log in again. Try that.
Good idea. And also we will be sending out the PowerPoint to everybody who's got a ticket, so you'll get it later.
Okay.
Carry on, Lucy.
I will carry on. Can we have the next slide, please? And while I'm talking about the wall paintings, I shouldn't forget the sculptures. These are from Clychurch, and they're absolutely fabulous, but hidden as a lot of medieval art was, which is what saved them. These are the misericords underneath the seats in the chancel, and you've got a lovely bird there. The head is on the end of the seat, the armrest, which is why the top of his head is so shiny. And you can see the bearded figure next door to him in the middle. And just like there were travelling artists who went from church to church and were paid for their work on the wall paintings, there were travelling craftsmen who would reproduce the same sort of figures in every church. But the misericords are interesting because, as you probably know from looking at other ones, they're not supposed to be holy portraits in any sense at all, or moral. They're just local figures and birds and beasts and ideas that came in the artist's imagination.
I think Norwich Cathedral's Misericords, which are close by, has a woman spanking her baby's bare bottom. amongst other things.
Yeah, they're a wonderful way to see actual life at the time.
And that portrait on the end, on the left,
Yeah,
is that a portrait of Julian?
no, that's just a figure in the village of Cly that caught the attention of the sculptor. That's what I'm saying. They weren't particularly holy at all, these wood carvings. The wood carvers just went to what interested them, which makes them unique.
And they enjoyed it.
They enjoyed it, yes.
They
And
wanted to-
if you've been to Ely Cathedral, it's fantastic, so carving there. And quite a lot of it is hidden. You can't see it. You can only feel it out of sight. Because they didn't mind that. It was the work itself that was the worship to God. It was the work itself, not what people could see.
May I say something
Yeah.
about the face of the woman? Actually, there was a talk at Dragon Hall History Group about historical proofs of Julian of Norwich
Yeah.
by Andrew, I never remember his name, local historian,
Yeah.
and he was showing various images of women's faces, and he was very sure that we don't know what she looked like. We do not have.
Oh, no, how could we know? We don't even know what she was called, as I said last time. She's called Julian because she was the empress at Julian's church. But she doesn't give us any details of her life beyond the description of her illness.
And also he pointed out that Julian was a very common name at that time.
Yes.
So maybe she wasn't even called Julian.
No, that's what I mean. She was called after the church, definitely.
So the church is Saint Julian, who is a man from the continent. She lived in the church of that man who was a saint. She acquired her name by association with where she went.
The earlier picture I showed you of the nobleman, that was St. Julian. Definitely male. Now, it's interesting that of the wall paintings we know about, 35 sites have been uncovered in Norfolk, 23 in Suffolk, and only 1 or 2 in any other county in England. Because Norfolk has a history of preserving things. We don't know why, but they were more likely to cover things with lime wash, perhaps. They were more likely to save the manuscripts, like the wonderful manuscripts of Julian of Norwich, which, 2 of which come from Norfolk. Because in the 18th century, the very first group of antiquarians permitted by the king were the Norfolk antiquarians. Believe it or not, antiquarians were forbidden in the 17th century as being dangerous groups. So in the 18th century, they had a revival, and one of the things they did was preserve as much as possible. Could we carry on? And here we have a legend, which, sorry,
just asking about the last one, you said 25 sites of London Norfolk, was that portraits of Lady Julian or just
no, there are no portraits of Lady Julian.
right.
Just sites where we have uncovered wall paintings.
Oh,
We know that there are wall paintings on most of the churches in Norwich. If you look carefully, you can see the signs,
yeah.
but Norfolk leads the way in uncovering them, so you can actually see them.
Elsewhere in the country, they just aren't covered.
We don't know. It's a mystery.
They're not uncovered.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. If you look at a lime wash wall, and it's slightly bumpy like most church walls are,
Yeah.
is there a wall painting underneath it or not? Very hard to tell. Yes.
There's something else I read about wall paintings, that why there is so many in this time, yeah? It's just what you said, but also apparently the Victorians believed that medieval churches were just stone. So in other parts of the country, they ripped out all the plaster and destroyed all the wall paintings they ripped out the plaster to expose the stone.
Yes, yes. If I can go back to the legends, because I do need to, I just glanced at my watch, I do need to get a move on. The three living and the three dead, these are the three living, obviously, and they're out hawking. You can just about see there's a little hawk. No, he's holding out his hand in horror. That's the servant at the back. You can tell because he's smaller. That's what small size it indicates, being not important. And the story is that these three, the king and his servants, went out hunting. There were three of them, and they met three skeletons in the woods. And the skeletons said to them, "We were once as you are. You will be as we are." At which the king and his servants fell to their knees and repented. And that's what the story is about. So it's another form of doom painting. And there's an awful lot of doom painting in Norfolk churches. And they could be the Last Judgment or something like this, or just plain skeletons. Yes.
We used to sing a frightening song about that when I was a little girl, about beauty skeletons. And we would be like,
That's very good.
And then they all went, ah, teacher.
So there you are, very old song. Can I move on? This is Honing Church, which has more of a wall with a story. I just wanted to show you. You really need to go and see these churches if you're local and you're interested. I mean, the closest I think is Crossfight, which is really just outside the city. And even in Norwich Cathedral, they've begun uncovering some of the colour that was originally there, haven't they, Howard? It's mostly the decoration rather than the pictures, but you can still see it. I'm going to move on from there. That one's better. I like this one. This is a deposition. Note the interesting headwear. You can see from the wall paintings indications of the clothing of the time. It's how we date them.
Deposition meaning the placing of Christ's body in the tomb.
Sorry, yes, yes. And what I particularly love about this one is the angel waving the incense up there. Because what's fascinating about the 14th century is that you're on the cusp of artists discovering perspective and landscape and other things like that. But the earlier artists, they didn't mind whether it was logical or not. They just put what they thought. And I kind of admire that. So, and notice that this is obviously a rich church because you've got quite a rich blue on there, on that decoration, as opposed to the poorer village churches. Can we go on?
Do you know which church that is?
No, because it's a church in Italy, I
Oh,
believe,
okay.
and I cannot remember the name.
Not to worry. then.
Sorry. And this one's seething, and they get, oh, I put this one in because you can just see St. Christopher ghosting through the lime wash at the side. Can you see that? And you can see what I mean about perspective, because you've got one story right next to the St. Christopher, and there's no idea among the artists of I'm going to try and fit in with the next chap's story. It's just you were commissioned to paint that picture in that church, so you did it. But yes, we can move on there. No, we can move on from that one too. That's pretty much the same. And I missed out painting on wood, of which we have an excellent fine example in Ranworth in Norfolk, where the panels are scratched and defaced by the soldiers in the Civil War and possibly after the Reformation. But what is most notable, and I don't know if this is just Norfolk, is the locals actually wanted to preserve these things, and we can tell that because things like these panels were simply hidden away. And certainly in the Civil War, the locals would actually take apart whole stained glass windows and bury them because they knew it was a passing thing. They didn't think Cromwell was going to be there forever, and they wanted their pictures. And that's why you sometimes get stories about, oh, big dooms painted on wall panels being hidden in barns and uncovered in the 20th century, where they're hastily reinstated and cleaned. But Ranworth is a particularly fine example. Sorry, that's an awful picture. It's quite pixelated. Sorry, I apologise for the PowerPoint. If you look up Ranworth Church, you will see it. You will see the pictures fine online. All this stuff I'm telling you about. There's a wonderful site about medieval wall painting. Most of the churches that own these paintings have got much better images than I'm showing you here. I'm just doing the best I can.
So that site you just referred to is a Norfolk site?
Ranworth.
No, the internet site you just said.
It's actually covers the whole UK. It's kind of like a dictionary of English wall painting, but it's online, yes. And when we're talking about damage, of course, we must think about the wars of the 20th century as well, which did great damage to Norfolk churches, particularly in Norwich, and St Julian's and St John's Timber Hill, which are two of the churches involved in the exhibition, were damaged. And the remaining things you can see in St Julian are the reredos and what's the other thing that survived the bomb?
The reredos survived, the lamp hanging over the altar.
And the lamp.
And the base of the tower.
Yeah.
And then one or two bits and pieces of silver and things like that, but that's kind of what you can see.
So the reredos and the lamp that you'll see inside the church, and if you're on Zoom and you want to see them, I will personally take a photo of them for you. But I expect this one on the website, isn't it?
There is,
Yes, yes. But this is what happened to St Julian's in World War II. And it's a real miracle the reredos and the lamp survived at all. But if we can go on to the next slide. The font at the back of the church is a Seven Sacraments font, and it is medieval, but it's from a different church in the city that was also bombed. And what happened after the war was that various bits and pieces were put into churches that needed restoring and thus saved. Yeah. This is St John's Timber Hill. And I just wanted to mention, though I know I'm teaching quite a lot of you to suck eggs, but the thing that the modern mind often doesn't realise is that the whole church is a teaching aid. You come in and through the porch is secular, you can sit there and talk. Once inside, you must go by the font. In order to go by the font, you have to be baptised. It's a reminder, only the baptised should be in the name. Which is probably one reason why they were doing baptism of infants. The name was for the people, and in the name you get the confessionals, so you confess your sins, you listen to the preacher, you pray, and then you go on up the altar steps, and there isn't one here, but in most churches there would be a rood screen, and you can see right at the top the arch where the rood screen was. Thank you, Howard.
If you'd stepped out of that little door, you'd have been able to step onto the top of the screen that would have been across there. This is one of the sites.
It's called the rood for the cross. The cross is the rood. And in order to get into the chancel, which is the priest's domain, you had to go up the steps and under the cross. So through the blood of Christ, basically. And with Jesus on the rood screen would be probably Mary and probably St John.
So can you, where's,
sorry,
where
can
would you
you
step up
indicate,
to the top? Ah, there.
can you draw a line where the rood screen would have been out
Yeah.
across the whole church?
So this is a doorway, this is where your feet would be, and the rood screen would have been across from there to there.
Okay, so it was completely dividing the chancel from the name. And that's what those paintings were.
Could you get
Could
anyone get to the altar then?
Yes, you could go through the chancel, up the steps to the altar, but The nave is the domain of the church wardens and the people of the parish, those that are baptised. But the chancel is where you approach the altar. Now, in the medieval mind, the altar was the nearest to heaven you could get. Therefore, what happened was, sorry, Howard, I know you want to interrupt, but I'm going to say this because we're running out of time. In order to get to the altar, quite often in Norfolk churches, you then find tombs. Sometimes the altar itself is a tombstone, as it is at Paston, which was not the original intention at all. But it's this medieval desire to get as close to God as possible when you died. Therefore, the rich of the parish would pay to be there, or to have a chantry built like the chantries in Norwich Cathedral, where they could have their own private altar. It's like the Wilton diptych I showed you at the beginning. There's King Richard II kneeling at the feet of the Virgin Mary. They would paint themselves into the pictures because it was a sign of devotion. Okay? So you go from the porch, the outside, all the way through to the altar. And all these things the priest would have taught you were ways to heaven. Literally ways to heaven. And the colours used in the church, the purple during Lent, the white for great festivals, they all have symbolic meaning, just as the things that saints hold have meanings. It's a whole language, which I can't go into now, but you can look up if you're interested. But it's a language we don't share, and Julian would have known all about. And she sometimes uses these phrases, and they refer to this, but I think it's hard for us to understand. Right, quickly, on to the pigments. We have the earth pigments, which I've already talked about. I love these because I'm a potter and I use all these pigments all the time with the pots. And these would be mixed with gum arabic or some other sticky substance in order to attach it to the wall and make it into paint. Different pigments, different basic substances, depending if you're painting on wood or wall or whatever. Then we have the expensive one. There's some lapis lazuli, and there's what it looks like in a powdered form. And that gives us the colours, the ranges of ultramarine. And they are very, very expensive. Okay. There's also the stained glass. And the stained glass artists, this one's St. Peter Mancroft, the stained glass artist, you can tell this is seasons, this isn't saintly either. We'll be using exactly the same basic pigments. If you want a really good site about all this, there's a castle being built from scratch in France called Guerdion. And they have a site where they tell you all about the process of producing new pigments. If you can move on. I've gone on to the manufactured colours and the gold leaf. Gold leaf is actually powdered gold, just as silver leaf is powdered silver. Gold leaf is used more often than silver leaf because silver leaf tends to deteriorate really rapidly, much as silver plate does. I've put a pestle and mortar there because this is to remind you why the apprenticeship for being an artist was 7 years. You had to learn how to actually make your colours before you could be trusted to actually try them out. And then you'd be trying them out on a little bit of whatever work your master was involved in until you became a master yourself. But the actual process of producing paint is so far from our experience of popping into a shop and buying it. And of course, they all have their own recipes. I've got a little bit here about lead white in particular. Sorry,
I just say, I don't think it was somewhere in the Netherlands, I think. There's one woodland, and it was on the news recently, and he uses the woodland to grind and create pigment. I have to find it for you. He's the only one that does it. And it just talked about all the things we just mentioned, about how to create the paints as they would have been.
Yeah.
And artists come to try and replicate, go to their order and things like that. Big stones.
The poor apprentice using something like that to grind scraps of lapis lazuli, which is basically stone, and then sieve it just to get the pure grains of blue out. Amazing. Now, lead white manufactured colours are interesting. There was a book called the Mappa Clavicula in 1130, which was the first book with recipes for paint. And lead white, which is the commonest white used, was prepared by suspending strips of lead above vinegar or wee in a vase, sealing it, burying it in a dung pit for several days, and this produced a crust, which the artist apprentice would then scrape off the lead and grind for use, having purified it. And that's why lead white tends to get a bit darker when it's exposed to air. Just to make the artist's job more difficult, some of these paints reacted with each other, so you wouldn't get the colour you wanted. Terra Verde, green earth, is the ground for all the faces you see in those beautiful, beautiful walls in all the frescoes in Italy. They use Terra Verde for the first faces, but they've discoloured over time, and you see this ghost of greenish flesh coming through the faces now, which is actually rather beautiful. I like the process of timing, of age. I think a wall painting discoloured with the years is just as wonderful as a fresh one. But we only get a fraction of the colour that would have been there originally. I just wanted to put in this bit from the Book of Esdras, which is from the Apocrypha, which is not in the modern Protestant Bible. And it's about workmen, people like us, artists. They rely on their hands, and each is skillful at his own work. Without them, a city cannot be established, and men cannot live there. But they are not sought out in council, nor do they attain eminence in public assembly. But they keep stable the fabric of the world, and their prayer is the practice of their trade. I rather like that. Yes.
25 parts now.
25 parts. Right, so we need to move on hastily to coffee and tea, and to moving on to seeing the reenactors and the illuminator. I'd just like to say goodbye to those of you online, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. I am going to send you via email as much information as I can, and Howard is going to send you the PowerPoint. So you will have a taste of most of this, but not unfortunately of seeing the illuminators, because we couldn't use them there. I would just like to say I'm really looking forward to seeing all the proposals, as are we all. What has come in so far is really exciting and interesting, and that's what we want. We want conceptual art, we want light, we want sound, colour, traditional trades, because they're all part of the conversation we want to have with people about the showings of Julian and what the pictures actually mean. So thank you.